So I've had a lot of questions regarding my workbench, so I thought today we'll dive in and we'll have an overview. We'll look at how I've designed the workbench. I did have a different top once before, so we'll talk about that as well. And then I'll talk about the mistakes that I made when I made this workbench. So let's dive in and we'll have a look at the design of this first. This bench design is in the Robot style. It's not a split top, it's just a straight solid laminated top, which traditionally would have been done with a slab, but with the lack of availability of slabs, this has been done with glued up pine. Now generally hardwood or a softer hardwood would be better for this. Pine does work, it's just a cheaper option for people that can't get a hold of hardwood. Does it matter that it's a little bit lighter? No, it doesn't, but obviously weight on a workbench is not a bad design, but I'll talk about other ways to prevent your workbench from moving around when we get down to under the workbench here. So the standard Robot style is a slab top or laminated top as I have here, and then 4 legs. If we look in here, it's undercut, so the first leg comes in here. On this side over here, if I just move it across for you, this leg sits in a little bit from the edge of the bench here, so you could put a tail vise in. I don't have a tail vise because I don't have the space in this workshop, because I need the bench shoved right across here to the right so I can get in and out. First of all, we're going to dive down, we'll have a look at the structure underneath so you can see exactly how I put it together. So now we're down where we don't really think about often, and I've never showed you in my videos, and that is under the workbench. Now obviously you can see I've got a shelf here, and we've got 4 solid legs right here. The idea is that these solid legs have a bracer bit on either side down here. They have a stretcher here as well. Then they come up, and the idea is they're meant to be mortised into your worktop, so they don't actually need a top stretcher, and the idea is the bench top itself actually stops the legs from moving around. It all stays nice and solid because it's supposed to have a full mortise right into the bench top that comes through the top. And that's not what I've done when I've made this, and we'll talk about that when we get to my mistakes. So part of the requirements when I made this bench was that I wanted some sort of a knockdown construction, so the top could be taken off, we could take the legs apart, and it could be carried out in separate pieces. So what we're looking at here is the stretcher and the leg on the front right hand side as you guys are looking at it on the workbench. Now I've got the same setup on all 4 corners, so we'll look at this one and then you'll know how I put it together. So what we've got here is there's no tenon on this stretcher. This is cut square here, and it actually is bolted to the leg. Now what this is a barrel nut, so it runs in, and my piece here was not long enough to have it buried in, so I didn't put it in from the inside because it was going to punch out here anyway, so I put it in from the outside, but they're actually designed to be hidden up in the back so you can't see them. And then there's a bolt here. I believe it was an M12 bolt. Runs straight into the thread, you do it up, and it pulls it in nice and tight, and I've actually had no problems with this. This works well for knockdown construction, so you undo the bolt and you can take these stretchers off and obviously take the legs apart. Now there's one other thing that I haven't mentioned down the bottom here that I just wanted to cover off before we move on. When you're designing a workbench like this, make sure you've got ample of gap under the bottom of your lower stretcher for your feet to go in under here. Otherwise you're always going to bang your feet and your toes and stuff, and you want plenty of clearance that you can just get your foot in under here. So that's another allowance. We have this other small stretcher here, and this is actually attached with 2 dowels on each side into the legs. And some of you are probably already guessing the issues that I might have had with that, and so when we get to the mistakes you'll find that out. So now what I want to do is just direct our attention up here to the vise. What we have here is an Eclipse vise. Now this was a brand new Eclipse vise. If you're wondering, it is got a 9-inch capacity, and it is the EWWQR9 if anyone's interested in buying these new ones. Now this is obviously the cast iron style with the quick release that allows you to easily adjust this open and closed. What I want to show you is how I've installed it. So what I've done here is installed this wider jaw here because I wanted a wider clamping capacity to what the original here has. And so what I've got here is about 150 mil deep, maybe 200 mil deep, I don't remember the exact measurements. And so what's happened is that I've actually dropped this down, and you can actually see these holes here, and that was from another vise that I had on here, and I changed out back to this cast iron vise because I had more issues with that one. So what I did here was cut a section out of my workbench. I was able to get this capacity right to the edge of the bench here, have a large, wide, I think it's 400mm capacity here, and it allowed for decent clamping. The whole idea here is that everything stays flush through the front of your bench here, so you can actually sit a sheet of plywood in, goes right down to the ground, comes right in here, right over to the back leg of the bench, and you can clamp it, and because you've got this flush face, it doesn't get in the way. Now, some people with this sort of design go a little bit further and they put some dog holes in here so they can actually support a board all the way through, and generally not this leg by the vise, but the back leg. So now I want to talk about workbench heights. Now, I'm not here to tell you, what height is perfect for you, because it's really a personal decision. Everyone has different height workbenches because everyone's different heights. But this one that I have here is 900mm to the top of the bench here, and I'm 5'10", just as an indication for any of you out there. I just wanted to go back to what I touched on about how we weigh workbenches down to stop light ones from moving around. Now, my one, when it's empty, it would move around a little bit if I have nothing underneath, and shelf storage under them is a vital storage spot. Whether you got cabinets, drawers, you can store all sorts of tools under there which will help weigh it down. Myself, I have the 2 tool chests under there that have got some tools that I don't use often down under there. Bottles of evaporast, hand cleaner, alcohol for mixing shellac, that sort of thing. Plus, hand tools, hand planes, sometimes some clamps, hold fast, all that sort of heavier stuff down under the workbench. Those larger objects that you can't store anywhere else, it's perfect to put that down under your workbench. And because really all you need to do is stop your workbench from moving around, mainly what's going to cause it to move around the most is heavy work with something like a scrub plane. And it's only really with your hand planing that your workbench is going to move around, and so adding that storage under there, you don't really have to think about it. It's not likely to move around. The other thing that I've done here is I've had 2 rows of 3/4 inch dog holes for things like holdfast to fit, accessories like this little twist piece that allows you to clamp it on the top if you don't have a tail vise, and brass bench dogs. And that is the design of my workbench. Now, there's a few things I haven't covered, like exactly how I attached this bench top yet, because when it comes to my mistakes, that's where I want to cover that little bit. But before we get on to the mistakes, I just wanted to talk about the first workbench top I had on here, because that kind of goes along with my mistakes as well, because I was working with material that I'd already used and it was already cut to a certain length. So that's something to factor in. So what I had up here was a similar top to what I've seen Rob Cosman make, and this is an offcut of it right here. What we have here is 3 layers of 19mm MDF glued and screwed together. The screws act as the clamp when you put this together, and so the first one stays clear, you glue the second one on, screw in from the back, note where they are, then put the last one on, screw into that, and that's how it's all held together. This makes a very solid top, and it's fairly durable once you put a bit of an oil coat on there. It does make the surface kind of slick, which, is not what you'd usually expect with something like MDF. Then what I did was add some pine on the edges. Ideally this would have been better if it was hardwood, but I was doing this completely on a budget. So I bought the 3 sheets of MDF, the exact size that I could use, then added this on. With the top with this sort of design, although these are machined flat, they need a lot more support under them to stay flat. I had a square frame sitting around the outside and those legs bolted onto the inside of it, and the entire frame was actually all bolted together, so I had exposed cut bolt heads right here where my vise was, on the corners, when I put boards in. I should have countersunk them, but I didn't, and you live and you learn. But that was the start of my mistakes when it came to the bench I'm using now with the top I've got on it, because I was working within the constraints of what I already had, and I didn't want to waste the timber I already had. For those of you wondering, I didn't throw this top out. I didn't just keep a piece cut off it. It's actually over here on my side cabinet unit over here, and I've done sharpening and all sorts over here. And so the main reason that I changed my bench top here was because of these things, the hold fast. Now, I think Rob Cosman and his ones, he put hold fast into the MDF, but I didn't feel confident to do that, and I didn't think that this tabletop was thick enough to do that, and I didn't really want to add any blocks and things underneath, which is an option. You can block out under them, but I didn't think that the MDF was going to be strong enough for hold fast, and that's why I changed to the laminated top. Thicker, heavier, more robust, but it did allow me to use the hold fast because I was getting sick of using conventional F clamps and C clamps and things like that to actually hold stuff to the edge of the bench. And when it came to using joinery planes, I wanted everything flush with the edge of my bench here. And if we mock it up with this, you can push this up to the edge, get your hold fast in on the sides. It's clear of any joinery planes that you want to use, and you can do your joinery right on the edge. Much easier on your bench. Especially if you don't actually have a tail vise, which of course you could use a tail vise with a dog to actually lock this in here as well. But because of my constraints that I've got here in this small space, as I said, I don't have a tail vise, so these are other options that we can talk about. So now I want to move into my mistakes so you don't copy my mistakes when making your first workbench. And this is a doozy. There's a lot of mistakes here. A lot of it is, I didn't really know what I was doing. I wasn't confident with doing joinery. And I was working with material from a salvaged workbench using jarrah that is actually reclaimed from an old pergola post for the legs and the cross stretches. And that jarrah is almost rock hard. And I also didn't really have sharp chisels. I didn't really have a way of actually making these mortise and tenons properly. So mistake number one. When I first made this top here, well, what I did is I went, oh, I'm going to make this laminated top. I had enough clamps and I'm just like, all right, I'm going to laminate the entire thing up all at once. Now, that is the mistake. Laminating a 600mm wide top such as this up in one go. Now, what I had was issues with keeping all of these boards in the right alignment, and some of them shifted and moved, and then I had some that were I had one at least that was way too low for the rest of them. And to this day I still have this spot here where you can see where I flattened it, and this didn't have material removed. Because this one here, when I first made it, was about 5 or 6 mil lower than the rest of the bench because it slipped. I didn't notice it. I probably should have, but I didn't, and even to this day I still have this spot that's lower than the rest of it, and when I reflatten it I just go over the top of it. Obviously most of this reference area here is still fine and over the back, and so at the end of the day you make do with what you've got, but that is a mistake that I want you to avoid. When it comes to something, when you're laminating one of these slab style tops, do them in 2 halves or in 3 bits, about 5 or 6 boards. I wouldn't go any wider than that because you can work with 5 or 6 boards and then you can actually get those 2 parts together and then bring them together in the middle, and that's going to ensure way better results than what I had when I made this. Not understanding what I was doing, not really having heard from anyone else that had been making these style of benches for that mistake. And so that's a really important one. If you are going to do a slab top bench like this, don't do it all in one go. Please, please don't. Even if you're using glue that's got a really wide open time, do yourself a favor, don't do it. Even if you don't have enough clamps, just do 2 smaller parts first, then bring them together, and you're going to get far better results. Now, I just wanted to show you just how wavy the bench top is, because we're going to go under the bottom of this bench top and have a look, which shows what it was like when, or before, I originally flattened this bench. So, once again, under the bench here. Now, excuse this light, it's the only one I can show this for you. Now, if we look at the bottom here, this is something else that normally I would have finished this with oil to help prevent it warping. And because of the state it was in, I just did the top, and I didn't worry about the bottom, which is another mistake that I made. But what I want to show you here is you can see how wavy all of this is through here. Now I believe the one that sits really low is this one here, but you can see that they're just all over the place, not remotely close. Now normally with something like this you'd probably put a scrub plane to this to at least flatten it out so you can align your joinery and whatnot, and that's something else that I didn't do. So that's mistake number 3. So now we look over here, mistake 4, 5, 6, something like that. There's about 3 mistakes I'm about to show you here. So I didn't tell you how this workbench is sitting on the top. I told you that it should have had some sort of through tenon with a robot bench. Now, with the knockdown design that I have here, I realized that I should have had a little stub tenon that went maybe half the way into the workbench, and I didn't have that. And we can also see around here, I can fit my finger in here, none of these shoulders are actually square. The sides are not square. All that happened was that a power plane was put over it because I didn't have many work tools at that time. And you can see here some remnants of the paint on here, and a power plane. I went over these edges, took the paint off it. I didn't really realize about squaring it up so I could get a square shoulder. I kind of just put a square around it and lined it up, and I think I cut it with a panel saw. I can't do joinery cuts with a panel saw. It's too flexible. That's what a back saw is for. And so these shoulders are all over the place. Not one bit of them is square. And so up here, this one here, it references on the back edge of this one. On this front one here, it's registering on this back corner, just on one corner. And so what I've got on the top of this to hold it on is some, I believe it was 25mm dowels sitting in the top. I just drilled them in the top, put the hole in the top, and then sat it on it. With those 2 things, this bench in the robot style is nowhere near as strong as it should be. And then following up with that, which I would have done if I didn't stub tenons, is I've got a couple little brackets just screwed in, and that's just to hold the top on. For those of you making this style of bench, I don't think I would just trust the legs being held by the top. And with gravity acting even on a big top like this, I would have some cross stretches sitting at either end in these leg segments that are mortised and tenoned in here, and allows this part of the bench to rest and is supported and to help it act against gravity from warping, and I do believe that would make a big difference. We'll back down my vice side of the bench here, and what we're going to look at is this stretcher. Now, remember I said that I had double dowels into these, and partially because I don't think I had enough length of the timber, I can't really remember, or I wasn't confident in doing the mortise and tenon, something like that. And so I ended up drilling 2 dowels into each side here and gluing that in. Now, the problem with that is that it doesn't really have the strength when you've got a lot of weight of this workbench on top of it. And over time, I've actually had to re-glue these dowels in twice. One time was because of my shelf and not realizing about wood movement, and I had it too tight in here on the legs, and it swelled and it forced them apart, and it gave just down here on this side. In actual fact, it's this side that's given every time. Not quite sure why, but it was always this side, so there might have been a slight weakness in the glue on this side. The dowels didn't break, the glue just gave way. And that's partially this old this old jarrah. The glue doesn't hold it very well. It's a very tight-knit grain, and so the glue doesn't have a lot to get into. And that could be why, I'm not quite sure. But what I'm saying is, if you're putting a shelf down on something like this on top of your stretcher, make sure you got plenty of gap for wood movement. And when you're putting these in, don't use dowels. Do mortise and tenons. But when it comes to knockdown construction, what I would do is actually keep the barrel bolts on the long stretches, mortise and tenon, a top and bottom stretcher on both ends. And so when you take it apart, you have those 2 leg assemblies with their stub tenons, and that will stay nice and strong. And so there you can see, I've made a lot of mistakes on this workbench. It does still work. It might not function exactly the way that I would like, but it does work. So if you do something similar to mine in this knockdown fashion, do make sure that you're timber, if you've got reclaimed timber like I'm using here, does actually have some reference faces so you can do your joinery and get them square. Make sure you got some sort of a back saw so you can actually get nice square lines, and do the knife wall sort of thing to increase your accuracy with a first class cut, and avoid dowels completely. Dowels might seem like a quick and easy way to do it, but they will fail, especially under the weight of heavy benches and a lot of work. Especially one like this where I lift it up on the wheels with all the heavy weight underneath it, work boxes that you see over here and all of that sort of thing. It's just too much for dowels. And the only reason that my bench didn't completely fall apart when those dowels lost it is because that bottom shelf is actually screwed in and it stopped the legs from splaying too far. So I was lucky in that respect. My entire bench could have actually collapsed. And so please don't use dowels. I would recommend on something this big, this robust, something you're going to be doing a lot of heavy work on, please, please, please use full tenons where possible and get proper joinery done, because they're going to be far, far stronger. So as you can see there, I've probably made more mistakes than most people would, and I've learnt from them. It's made me a better woodworker learning from these mistakes, but if you don't have to have those mistakes, and me doing this video is enough to allow you to prevent you making these same mistakes that I've made, and have a workbench that you like, and maybe your first workbench might be the one that you keep for the rest of your life because you got all the design right. I'm just hoping that I could help you with that. There are different workbench designs. I went with the Robot style because it was easier for the holdfast. Now, I know some of you are going to say, well, you know, this kind of thick 85mm, 50mm, 60mm wide timber is difficult to get here, particularly in Australia, and you're right. This sort of pine I found at a local salvage place near me, and that's how I got a hold of it for this bench. If you can't get a hold of that, you might have to use stuff from big box stores, such as Bunnings if you're here in Australia, and maybe the English jointers and Nicholson style might be better for that. And that has a similar design to the structure that I had under here when I had my old workbench on here, but you keep everything lapped in so it stays flat and flush as well. And there are some different designs with stretchers for holding that, and I'll leave a link to Paul Sellers' one down there where he covers using these wedges to actually hold the legs on, and he does a really good job with that, so I'm going to link to his video down there for that, because I'm not the top bottle on that, and maybe later on I'll end up building a bench like that, but for now I'll leave that reference if you want to check out another style. There are some other styles out there that I have seen that have got slanted legs and things, and the workbenches are portable, they're light, and they don't rack because of the angle on the legs. And I'm not quite sure exactly what those workbenches are called, but if I can find the link, I'll leave that down below to a video where I saw someone making one of those as well. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please sound off in the comments below if you've made these mistakes, or if you think these mistakes that I've made are going to be helpful for you. I'd love to know if there's any other changes some of you might have made to the design of this particular workbench. I know it's not exactly a Robot in its true sense, because it's not full mortise and tenoned, and it certainly doesn't have the strength that I was hoping it would through my mistakes, but it still does work and it does get the job done. And I've learned a lot since making this, and when I do eventually get the space to make another workbench, I will bring you along for it and show you how I make a proper workbench to actually do it correctly without the mistakes that I've made here that I don't want you guys to repeat. So if you'd like to see another great video such as this, please check out the video up here where I go through how I reflattened my workbench while maintaining the thickness, and also the video over here where I go through work holding, particularly around the workbench. Bye for now.